Hi, everyone, and welcome to Half the Teacher I Once Was. Ohio early childhood educators describe their mental well-being during the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Amy Wolf. I'm faculty at Ohio University Chillicothe campus.
My name is Tiffany Rowland. I'm from the University of Toledo, and our colleague Jennifer Creaky Blackburn could not be here, but she is the owner and administrator of Blooming View Montessori Academy in Athens, Ohio. So some basic background information. Our state shut down for the stay-at-home order on March 23rd of 2020, but childcare programs reopened almost immediately on March 26th. They had to apply for an emergency pandemic licensure to serve families of essential workers and follow new mitigation strategies to stop the spread of COVID-19. In contrast, public school employees, they worked remote for the rest of the school year, and then the following school year when they opened, many of them were fully remote. Some did a hybrid method, and others were in person. However, they had access to safety and supplies to help mitigate that spread. While childcare employees, they had been working in person this entire time, and they had a difficult time finding PPE and cleaning supplies. So if you fast forward to when the vaccine became eligible, all states could choose how to roll out the vaccine. And in February of 2021, public school employees were offered the vaccine, but the childcare workforce had to wait till March. And we felt it was very unfair, given who was open and in person with families the entire year. And so our research question is, how did early childhood education and care professionals feel about being excluded from the educator phase of the vaccine distribution in Ohio?
So just to situate our work a little bit in the research, we know that the quality of relationships is built between children and adults. It's the foundation of healthy child development, and the turnover impacts quality. We also know that the cost of care in the United States versus earnings and wages is hugely different. The cost for infant care averages $1,230 or $800 a month for center-based or home-based care, respectively. But the national average wage for childcare workers was only $13.31 an hour. Teacher emotional well-being is critical for quality care and education. Teacher well-being is influenced by their self-efficacy, life satisfaction, financial stability, emotional and physical health, and autonomy. Teachers who are stressed are less able to provide emotionally supportive environments for their students, and teacher emotional exhaustion is associated with lower academic achievement among students. There were disparities already in the physical and mental well-being and job satisfaction between childcare and other sectors, but those were made worse during the pandemic. Supports were provided in Ohio, so there were state agencies and professional organizations that attempted to provide resources, training, weekly remote meetings to debrief and provide resources. And then there was funding provided. So there was federal legislation, the American Rescue Plan, that released funds to each state to help keep childcare open. And Ohio issued childcare stabilization grants, and those allowed spending for operating costs, recruitment and retention, to support worker and child mental health, and to expand or reopen classrooms. So the study was designed as an open-ended questionnaire. Participants were assured of their anonymity, and we collected no identifying data. It was self-administered and distributed over social media or via some state organizations. We did encourage participants to recruit additional participants from their contacts to forward the survey on to others to increase our pool. The questions included 12 demographic questions, 4 dichotomous that are listed there, and 4 open-ended questions. The open-ended questions are the source of most of the data we're going to talk about today.
And we had 194 participants in this survey. The gender distribution was 93% women and 4% men, and 3% identified as other. Racial distribution was 86% white, 9% Black or African American, and 5% were a mixture of other identities. Nearly 75% of the participants had worked at least 9 months during the first year of the pandemic, and 42% never closed, so they had an emergency pandemic licensure. 58% of our participants were owners or directors, 17% were lead teachers, and 8% were assistant teachers. And 62% of the respondents had worked in the field for longer than 15 years.
We used thematic analysis to identify patterns and themes. Codes were assigned initially using a initial coding structure, and then we applied additional codes as they emerged. So as patterns were discovered, we applied those codes to the entire data set. Once we had established 80% inter-rater reliability, we split the data and each person spent time coding one section. But then we ran through it multiple times and applied the codes with different reviewers. So each of us had our hands on all sections of the data at some point. We did organize the data then following a constructivist approach, attempting to create a narrative that makes meaning from the themes and patterns that we identify.
In our validation strategies, we engaged in reflexivity. We met often and we talked about how our own backgrounds and experiences could bias our analysis of the data to make sure that we were checking ourselves with that. We also employed member checking in collaboration with the participant to ensure that what was happening in the field and our interpretation of it was accurate. And then we also used peer review.
I forgot to mention that this survey was open from March to May 2020. So the perspectives are limited to that period of time. Of course, we've come to understand different things about the virus and the vaccines and the entire process since then. Okay, so our main findings were organized into 6 themes. The first 5 themes are presented in another paper. But this data highlights the 6th theme because it was so rich and full of information. We needed to present it separately. Overall, mental well-being was coded 141 times in the data. One participant said, "We were closed only 6 weeks. When we reopened in May 2020, I was completely terrified. I have a heart condition and felt that if I were to get the virus, I would for sure die. The pandemic has been devastating for my mental health. I feel like half the teacher I once was. I'm not as focused or motivated. Every day is a struggle to get out of bed and get going. I'm constantly waiting for the next shoe to drop. I feel like the whole world is getting back into order except me. I'm still languishing. I'm not well at all."
We also identified several sub-themes. The first sub-theme we identified was making decisions. This was coded 106 times. One participant said, "Of course, the pandemic impacted my mental health. The level of responsibility I feel for making good decisions is huge. I feel the weight of life and death decisions that impact the health and the lives of my employees, the children, and their families." Another participant wrote, "It felt like every day the governor and his medical team changed requirements or information. Besides having 700 plus regular regulations that we must follow, we then had all the COVID-19 requirements to follow."
Another sub-theme had to do with finding supplies. It's coded 16 times in the data. PPE supplies were so limited. Public schools were given dividers, sanitizer, hand soap, and more. Childcare centers had to go out and find our own at a time that was impossible, or stores had limited quantities. Another said, "My shoulders weigh heavy as I have had to scramble to find masks or other PPE, medical necessities, and simple things that we need to have to take care of our family."
Another sub-theme that we discovered was financial concerns, which was coded 48 times. "I also had to worry about my income. Ratios were cut in half, but all of my bills and staff salaries were still the same. It's been such a stressful time." Another person wrote, "I had a pandemic license and all of my families were determined to be essential. However, the financial support that we see others receiving in our community is seriously lacking. We have to care for our daycare families using our own monies. I've given my own groceries to families who didn't have enough food. I am not the only one struggling. My fellow home providers are too."
Another sub-theme had to do with the lack of control early childhood educators felt. This is coded 61 times in the data. Worried about exposure to the virus from others who may not be as diligent to the safety protocols. The pandemic has certainly impacted my mental health. I have considered retirement due to the stress and will retire soon. Another said, some of our parents that tested positive to COVID sent their children anyway. We did ask the COVID question every morning, but they did not answer truthfully. The school found out at a later date that the parents were sick.
And another something we identified was an inability to social distance, which was coded 32 times. One participant said, "We were asked to do our best to keep the children socially distant to reduce risks. Seriously? The children I care for are 3. It is of the utmost importance for them to play with their peers, to use all their senses in play, and to feel as normal as possible." And another person wrote, "I know many of my staff were anxious about the possibility of contracting the virus, and I worried that their anxiety would impact the children. I also worried about the quality of care that we provide would be negatively impacted due to the increased mandates and push for social distancing."
Another sub-theme, physical and emotional exhaustion, was coded 38 times. One participant said, "I have never stopped working since March 2020. As an administrator, I was in survival mode. My focus was making sure my staff and families got what they needed. I was too busy. I didn't have time to think. Now that we see a light at the end of the tunnel, my mental health has taken a turn. The trauma is just now getting to me. I feel exhausted, worn out, and used." And another said, "The pandemic has been stressful. We have increased our cleaning, taken a lot of new precautions, and been diligent to keep COVID-19 out of our building as much as possible. It's been a new level of exhaustion as a director. We were open as a pandemic center. Everyone has worked harder than we ever have."
And then another sub-theme we identified was that of isolation. It was coded 12 times. "This has meant that I have been incredibly strict about my exposure outside of work to anyone, and I've barely seen family or friends, only outside and masked for a year now. This has caused a lot of strain on these relationships, which has further hurt my mental health."
A final sub-theme, relief in returning to work, was coded 26 times. This is the only of the sub-themes that seems like a positive. One participant sums it up by saying, "Being back at work has helped my mental state because I feel useful and productive, and I'm with people again." So overall, these results demonstrate an increase in the mental health stressors among early childhood professionals during COVID-19. There are some quantitative studies that also illustrate this, but we thought the narratives really bring life or description to that. Financial concerns and mental and physical exhaustion are persistent problems in the field, but they were made worse by the pandemic. So overall, we believe that attention should be given to how mental wellness can support teacher retention in early childhood. Healthcare, including mental health care and other benefits, are essential to human well-being. And to make all of this happen, we recommend that policymakers in the United States and in Ohio restructure the field's funding system to be more similar to the public school system, which would help relieve the financial pressures that contribute to low wages and lack of employer-sponsored benefits. We recommend future studies on how the American Rescue Plan funds were used to support the mental health and well-being of the workforce during the pandemic. We think that there's room to identify effective interventions to support early childhood worker mental health and contributing factors to mental health disparities between early childhood and other professions. So overall, thank you so much for attending our presentation, and enjoy the